In the days that followed after death of his parents, DC grew. Couple years had passed now, age 14, he had become a black belt and teacher for younger kids. He grew in wisdom and strength, but still lacked maturity and often pulled pranks that got him in trouble. He would be spanked and often punished as he grew, so did an attitude. He would hang out with group boys he met when he was 12. They shared lots things, including causing mischief, landing them in trouble. As DC grew and getting near young adulthood, he was confused, and confidence was lacking in areas, but his martial arts skills. He lived his martial arts family, but he kept longing to find out more about his parents. Where they came from, was there any family out there he didn't know about? These were questions he pondered for years as he trained and grew. One day he decided he was going to go back to town, where he knew his parents came from, and try to find answers. Little did he know that decision would change his life forever. Been 8 years since his parents have passed as he packed and hugged his adopted family goodbye, promising he would return one day. He traveled for weeks, getting to a village on coast to take transport to where he was heading, to town where his parents were raised. As he traveled to reach his destination, exploring things he thought about his life been and where it was at currently. As he continued his travel, DC learned things he never really experienced as he traveled with missionary parents and raised in Korea since he was age of 10. Now he was 20 years old, exploring a world he was not used to, as where things in Korea were simple, rest of world was all new to him. He was learning about people, both good and bad, how rough world truly can be, how cold-hearted towards people who were not from within that world. First thing DC had to do was find a place to stay. And job. Now that he had reached the place where his parents were raised, he knew he had task of searching and learning about his parents' background. It took DC weeks to finally discover the first news about his parents and their background. He spent days combing through public records and library. He spent days working and researching. One day, he located his mother home she grew up in, only to learn as she traveled with his father her parents had passed. He continued to talk current residents who knew his mom's family to learn she was only sibling and that he had no one on his mom's side of family. As few days passed, he was working doing different farmhand jobs as he was used to working hard in fields in Korea. In meantime, he met some local young lads his age and started to hang around with. The lads weren't bad, but were known to get into mischievous trouble, end up in trouble with law from time to time. DC continued to work hard, but people could see change in him as he hung around these boys. Now a year has passed, and he had turned 21 and legal age for drinking. Now DC knew what sake was, a drink originated from Japan. DC never tasted any liquor or beer. That night he tried it for first time and passed out. He woke in jail but was released after he sobered up. DC went to work that day not realizing his life is about to change forever. The following weekend, DC and his friends had gone to pub. That night there was some other boys who truly were awful, loved to cause problems. Now DC and friends loved to have fun, but never caused major trouble. This night, the Ruffin Boys, as they called themselves, started to reckless DC, and others, well, the boys tried to ignore it and ask them to leave. Things quieted for a while, but then rougher boys started again, as they were now drunk. As DC knew trouble was going to happen, he urged his friends to leave as they tried to Ruffin Boys blocked their way. Now, DC wasn't one to back down, nor was he one to look for trouble. He tried to ask them to step aside so they could leave. One Ruffins pushed DC but did not react. He did warn that if they continued, he'd be forced to fight back. So Ruffin Boys laughed as he grabbed DC by collar, reacting. DC knocked arms out, grabbed Guy and hipped toss him. Side-kicked another in the stomach, knocking him out. Another tried hit DC with chair, but quick lightning speed did spinning sidekick to face, knocking him out cold. The next one tried to attack DC with a weapon as DC got cut couple times from weapon and chair. DC was able to control arm and injure the gentleman, throwing him with hip toss through windows. Now by this time, police had come at end of the fight, and DC friends scrambled out, leaving DC to face consequences. As DC sat in cell, he knew he'd be in trouble and be sent to prison. As DC was contemplating, he didn't realize the judge of his case knew his parents knew DC. After hearing story judge through book at the Ruffin Boys who admitted to starting the fight. Plus, the evidence showed what had happened. Now as DC sat in cell waiting to hear his fate, he thought stories heard about prison there. But he also wondered about school. he heard about for young adults that made bad choices in their lives. Called Finewood Academy, known for its fairness, yet strict guidance. Yet this school was very mysterious in nature. No one really knew how structured or disciplined it was. All people knew was who ran the school, the headmistress Ophelia, and lady named Miss Misha, were very strict disciplinarians. As DC wondered his fate, thought about those options or things that could happen, he was called before the judge. As the judge looked at him, he told DC how he knew him and that he had grew up with his parents. As he explained his story and discussed case with DC, he realized DC was not bad young person, but indeed made a bad decision. The judge proposed an idea that if DC voluntarily enrolls in Finewood, all charges against him would be dropped, and his record would be cleared. Nothing showing on it. DC was nervous. He never heard of this place. Most people knew very little of it. Just that had fine reputation. Scared, yet he knew he had to face consequences, was right thing to do. He chose the later to be enrolled at the Finewood Academy. That day changed DC forever, not knowing his future there or how long he have to spend there. He cried, like he hadn't since he was a kid, but questioned to ponder, is this bad or good thing for DC and his possible bright future?